All right, well, good morning, everybody. It's good to be with you today. I see a lot of friendly faces in the crowd and a couple that aren't so friendly that I'm going to try and avoid the rest of the day. So, in all seriousness, I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and give you some insight of what we've gone through over the last 20 years as we've tried to move forward and develop a new water supply for the region between Austin and San Antonio. Judge Blackburn, his leadership in this region is evident. Ricky Garrett, Dirk Aaron, we've had many conversations. It's clear they're passionate about this region and trying to do the right thing for the future. So what I'm gonna lay out for you today is just a little bit about how we did it. That doesn't mean this is the only path or the right path. It's just one option for how to move forward and get everybody together to develop a new water supply for a region. So first of all, who is Alliance Water? We're a wholesale-only water provider. It was formed by our sponsors for the purposes of providing a long-term water supply. They were growing, they needed new water options, and so they banded together to form a new entity. We were originally created in 2007 as the Hayes Caldwell Public Utility Agency. And then we converted to the Alliance Regional Water Authority in 2017 through a legislative process. So who are our sponsors? We've got three cities, the cities of San Marcos, Kyle, and Buda. That's all in Hayes County. And then we have Canyon Regional Water Authority as also one of our sponsors. And they really are representing for what used to be rural water supply corporation and special utility districts that are now urbanizing very quickly. Those are County Line Special Utility District, Crystal Clear Special Utility District, Green Valley SUD, and Martindale Water Supply Corporation. The map shows Austin's on the north, San Antonio's on the south, so you can see we cover a large area on the I-35 corridor between those two cities. So I thought I'd take a minute and step back and tell you what our situation was like about 20 years ago, maybe similar to what you're sitting at today. Again, just to start with a simple map, Austin's on the north. We've got I-35 running down to San Antonio, I-10 there down at the bottom. So starting with the dots of our three cities, the populations at that point in time were not very large. Buda was less than 3,000, Kyle was less than 6,000, and San Marcos was less than 35,000. So Buda at that point was still a general law city. So they were smaller communities, but they knew growth was coming. In fact, SH 130 was not completed in that area. It was under design, and they knew that was going to be a big impetus to growth coming along that area, and they felt the need to start to plan in the future. Their existing water supply sources at that point in time were groundwater from the Edwards Aquifer and surface water that they purchased through the Guadalupe Blanco River Authority that originated at Canyon Lake. The challenge was the firm groundwater rights were already fully permitted, and Canyon Lake was fully allocated shortly about that time. So they were in desperate need to find the next source of water to meet that growth that was coming to the region. This just shows that development was imminent. This is a future land use plan that the city of Kyle had that shows they knew they were going to be hit with developments. When we're looking back 20 years ago, they did not have a real grocery store in the city of Kyle. They had a mom and pop old grocery store that had been there for about 60 years. HEB opened about 20 years ago. The world was changing. They knew it. They knew they needed to get ahead of it. They were getting hit up by developers every week about, hey, we want to come to your area. And so they knew they needed to plan. So I want to show you what happened over those 20 years to the 2020 census data. San Marcos is now over 63,000 in 2020. So that's 182% growth from 2000. Significant, right? Buda was over 15,000 in 2020. That's a 550% growth. That's a heck of a lot of growth. And then finally, Kyle kind of takes the cake here. They are now over 46,000, 776% growth over that 20-year period. So it's just amazing how quickly these areas all grew, but they were smart enough to see this coming and knew they needed to get out ahead of it. And then looking forward to 2050, what's projected, and this is all again based on the state demographer's office, They are all projected to again, about double over the next 30 years. And I would, again, estimate that's probably a little bit on the low side. I think many of these communities are expecting that they'll need to they will more than double over the next 30-year period as they move forward. That there continues to be a lot of interest in the area. There continues to be a lot of factors outside of their direct control that are driving more interest to this region. And so they know that it's a continuous effort to continue to plan for the next supplies of water and continue to work together. So I imagine this is not dissimilar to what many of you feel sitting in this room today, that growth has already started to happen. Certainly you can see it as you drive through the area, but more is coming and you're trying to figure out how to plan for that. And so we were left with this. What are we going to do when the people get here? And so it wasn't enough just to bury our head in the sand and hope for the best or even plan just for today. We had to plan today for tomorrow's needs, and that's a continual effort that you've got to keep up in order to try and stay a little bit ahead of the growth that is coming to the area. So in our case, we started with a feasibility study just to determine, hey, what is the likely source for the next water to come to the region? What's the feasibility of developing that? And basically it was a high-level engineering study to start that effort. Prior to that, all of our sponsors were working independently, just trying to figure out, hey, how are we going to get ahead of our water supplies? What options are out there? But this was the first time they kind of started really coming together to look at it in a more long-range effort. We started with 13 different entities that were involved and were interested. And that later whittled down after the end of that study to where there was only 6 or 7 that chose to move forward. So just because everybody participates early on doesn't mean everybody wants to get in that boat with you and move forward. In our case, after the end of that review, it was determined that the Carrizo-Wilcox Aquifer was the best source of supply and laid out some of the basic infrastructure that was necessary to produce, treat, and deliver that water to the various sponsors, and had some cost tags associated with that, right? It's always important to have some estimate of what that cost is going to look like. We also had some political concerns in the area, right? I don't know a region that doesn't have various levels of political concerns. And I broke ours down into 3 different areas. We had some intergroup dynamics, we had a river authority that played an interesting role, and behemoth municipal neighbors. So let's start with the intergroup. We had a bunch of different communities that had been rivals for decades. These communities played football against each other. They didn't really like to see one succeed over the other. It was very much a competitive type environment. And so it took a long time, and in some cases it still shows up, that you've got to find a way to work together for the greater good rather than those independent squabbles. One thing we have found through ultimately the development of Alliance Regional Water Authority is it's allowed these communities to move forward together, not just on water, but they were able then to have conversations on the side about transportation and other things that made the region really come together, I think, better than it would have independently. So this was kind of a catalyst for more discussions for them to really work together as a group. But that was a really significant challenge to begin with. And then I mentioned San Marcos at 35,000 people. They were considered the 800-pound gorilla in the room at the time. Everybody was fearful that San Marcos was just going to come in and dominate the room, and whatever San Marcos said was going to go. And so there was lots of fear that it was going to be led by one group, and they were going to drive the boat everywhere. And so it really took an effort on San Marcos's part to take a step back and trying to get consensus on every topic that we reached, so that everybody around the table that wanted to move forward could get to the point where they could approve and agree to move forward. And so that took a remarkable amount of effort on San Marcos's part to kind of take a step back and not be the dominant group in the room, but to really work with all the neighbors to try and keep everybody satisfied and moving forward. I mentioned the local river authority. It's complicated. The sponsors I've mentioned had contractual relationships with the Guadalupe Blanco River Authority for water supplies. GBRA also in many cases operated their water or wastewater plants. But yet the trust factor between the River Authority at that point in time and the sponsors had broken down. And so the communities weren't just reliant upon the River Authority to find the next supply of water and deal with this for them. They wanted to be in control of that effort and have direct control over that future water supply. And so that, in many cases, created a lot of friction between our communities and Alliance Water ourselves and the River Authority. And so that created a difficult environment at times in the community as we moved forward. And then the final political concern was we were sitting smack dab between Austin and San Antonio, and those are two behemoth regions. Representative Larson, led San Antonio for many years in looking at water issues, and at that point in time, Austin was a little bit more, they had their plan in place. They were reliant on water out of the Highland Lakes, and they had a 100-year water supply plan, so we felt like they were a little bit more certain where they were going to be over the long term. San Antonio, though, was looking at all different types of options. They were being pretty aggressive to determine where their next water supplies were going to come from. And we knew that those decisions could impact us in the area. And so that was something we had to be mindful of as while we had a significant group of people that came together to form an entity, we paled in comparison to the political might that the city of Austin or city of San Antonio had. So that was a reality for us in that area. So ultimately what happened, our customers figured out that they were given the impending wave of growth, that they were determined that they were better off working together than trying to do it individually and go their own way. And so it was really a combination of the growth coming, the need for that, and the political environment that drove them together that said, we've got to work together to solve this. We can't rely on others just to come in and take care of it for us. We're better off combining and figuring out how to move this forward. I mentioned earlier in the feasibility study phase, we had 13 original entities involved. And so we ended up with 6 of those entities that wanted to move forward and really start working together. We spent a fair amount of time looking at different, I'm gonna call them vehicles, but different types of entities that might get the job done before ultimately settling on initially creating the Hayes Caldwell Public Utility Agency, or HCPUA. And then in 2017, we converted that to the Alliance Regional Water Authority through the approval of Senate Bill 1198. And so that's just our conversion there from the HCPUA to Alliance Water. But coming out of that, we had, when the HCPUA was formed, we kind of had 2 different sets of priorities we had to move on simultaneously. The first was water supply. The whole purpose of this was to secure and get a long-term water supply and develop that for the customers. And so we never wanted to lose sight of that priority. And so we needed to determine how much water was needed and when, define the infrastructure. In our case, the Carrizo Aquifer is where we chose to go. We started a water rights leasing effort to go out and lease the water rights from willing landowners that overlied the Carrizo Aquifer. And then we wanted to be involved with the state water plan coordination so that it could help us link up with long-term financing. And so it was important for us to be a part of the state water planning process, the desired future conditions and the groundwater management area process, all of the kind of the backbones of water planning in Texas. We knew we needed to invest time and effort to be involved in that as we moved forward. At the same time, we were a brand new entity. And so we had to set up a whole set of policies and structures so that we could be effective. We're a public entity. We were subject to Open Meetings Act, Freedom of Information Act. Our board wanted to be transparent in the decisions that they were making. So we had to set up a whole group of policies, not limiting to the board structure and our bylaws, get a water supply contract between all the entities that bound us together, that defined how that working relationship would go, and then how we would handle day-to-day operations. So those were 2 very separate types of efforts that we had to move forward with simultaneously. We couldn't take the time to get all the policy in place and said, we'll get to water later. That wouldn't work. We knew we needed to march towards the water. At the same time, our board really wanted to have an open, transparent process, and so the policy aspect of that was very important as well. So we started with some of the timing and phasing, and this is just a detailed graph to show we overlied all of our sponsors' water demands through time to try and figure out how much water we needed to identify for the future area, when we would need to bring those water supplies on, and we looked at phasing of it to allow them to grow into that and make it a little bit more affordable for them through time. And so this is one of the key efforts we had. One of the other, I think, remarkable items that we were able to institute, and it went back really to the initial feasibility study, is all the partners agreed that if somebody had some excess water, they were going to make that available, they were going to sell it to the other entities in the group that needed water sooner so that they could all kind of float together. And so that way we didn't have one entity that drove the need for all of the infrastructure to be built. It was more a matter of the accumulation of everybody together drove the need for the infrastructure. Meanwhile, if you were an entity that had excess supply, you're getting revenue off of water, otherwise that would just be sitting in your surplus. And of course, if you're an entity that needed water, you're happy to have those contracts to make that work. So I think that sharing plan, as we called it, was a very vital part of our overall strategy, and they were able to work together functionally to make that happen. I mentioned the infrastructure. This is just a map to show we had well field pipelines, just some different options to look at how we actually going to get that water from the well field into our customers. And so that's something that we continually updated through time as we moved forward. Regional water planning, it's been mentioned today, you sit in the Region G area here. For our customers, we're in Region L. It's also been called Region Hell over many times because there's lots of different political fighting that goes on there. I think that's somewhat subsided recently, which is good news, I think, for everybody. But again, we felt like it was necessary to be a part of that. We also knew that when it was time for us to go for our groundwater permits, we had to be consistent with the regional water plan. And so it was important for us to be a part of and tagged into that plan for permitting as well as for long-term financing. Board structure bylaws. I think one of the unique things that we put in place is a 13-member board of directors that's appointed by our sponsors. We set that number, which is a fairly large board, to try and get representation to be apportioned based on the water need. That's also the amount that each entity pays into the organization. And so that future water demand need and how much they expected to get out of Alliance Water was a critical aspect to everything we did. That tied together throughout. It is a large board. We've been very, I think, thankful that we've had a rather large board because it's allowed us to do one critical aspect is have both elected officials and staff from the cities involved. As I'm sure you're aware, elected officials can lose elections periodically. I'm sorry for those that are elected. It does happen periodically. And so they're not necessarily going to be involved for the long term. That many times it's a little bit shorter term period. But having the ability to do both the elected officials and longer term staff, it allowed us to keep some continuity in our direction as we move forward. We didn't have changes every year or two because of a significant changes in our board. It let us to have some long-term planning in place and keep our direction pretty consistent. Of course, the board has authority for most of the critical decisions and then delegates to the staff the more day-to-day operations. We also created an advisory committee. We originally called it an executive committee, later kind of retitled it to the technical committee that reviewed more of the technical issues, more of the engineering-related items, and then make recommendations to the board. We always said that group did a little bit more of the heavy lifting of the operations of the entity. Of course, a water supply contract is vital to any group moving forward. You have to define the terms of who pays for what and how everybody's going to work together. And so our water contract binds the entities together beyond the simple governance and bylaws. It is a take or pay contract, so you pay no matter how much water you get. And that's just kind of a staple of most water supplies that you see. It does include provisions for debt issuances, including in our case, we allowed, because our communities were different, they wanted the ability to have different series of debt for each sponsor. So some communities may want to do the lower interest rate on a 20-year note. Some may want to stretch that out further because they think more growth is going to come on the back end, and they want those future residents to pay more for that. So they want a 30-year term. And so we had the flexibility to structure our debt to meet each of the community's needs. And then ultimately, as I noted previously, the shares of the water produced and the shares of the payments to Alliance Water are apportioned based on that project share. So that water supply contract is really critical for everything we do moving forward. And of course, that took approval not only from our board, but also each of the sponsor entities going to their city councils to approve those and get that put in place. Communication was a vital aspect for us. We knew we needed to create effective, operate, and be able to operate independently from our sponsors. We're not going to be just a subset of our sponsors. We wanted to set up and be our own entity. We were initially managed via contract through an engineering firm, and then later hired a full-time executive director. And so on the right are just a whole list of some of the basic items we had to get put in place there for the overall authority's efforts. And then we knew from the communication standpoint, we needed to target kind of several different constituencies as we looked forward. We have the sponsors' ratepayers. At the end of the day, who is really paying for all the effort that we're doing? It goes to the ratepayer who gets the water bill every month. And so that was important for us to have some visibility to those ratepayers as to ultimately what they're paying for. We also had our water rights leaseholders. Those are willing agreements those landowners have entered into with us. They are very valuable for us as we go forward with our groundwater permitting, and it's important for us to have an open and good relationship with them. And so we have annual leaseholder update meetings with them to give them updates on our progress, what we're up to, what our plans are moving forward. And so that was another key constituency that's very different than the ratepayers. The groundwater districts as the permitting entity for us, primarily, we, again, need to maintain that relationship and transparency with them as to what our plans were. And then finally, there's kind of the developers and general public. There's always people that are knocking around trying to figure out, what the future is going to look like in the area, what it means for them and their prospects as they look forward. And so periodically we would present to different groups or entertain calls from different entities asking questions about what does the future really look like in this area in terms of a water supply. So from a public relations perspective, we of course have a website that we try and maintain and keep information refreshed on periodically. We outsource our public relations to a firm that does this on a monthly basis for us. We have all the social media handles, so those people that want to follow on social media, they get updates on our projects or board meetings or efforts. And then we also reach out to our sponsors and provide content for their social media and or websites as well. Again, trying to get as much as we can back to the ratepayers at the end of the day that really carry the tab for what we're doing. Okay, so just a minute, where are we now? Where are we at in this overall effort? And so I showed you some maps earlier. This is our current development map that we're underway with. On the far right-hand side of that, you may be able to see kind of an oval area that's shaded, and that's where our well field is located. It's in far eastern Caldwell County, about 15 miles east of Lockhart. If you know the area, it's about halfway between Bastrop and Gonzales on 304. So it's pretty rural. The community is actually known as Delhi. Unless you've been through there, you may not know about it. There's not much out there. It's a very rural area. That's where our well field and water treatment plant is located. And we've got the lines are our various pipelines that we have going to our sponsors. We've got about 85 miles of pipeline that are being built across this area to move that treated water to our customers. We also have a booster pump station in the Maxwell community, which is to the east of San Marcos, where the lines kind of split out and distributes. We've got line going north to hit Kyle and Buda and County Line Special Utility District. We have a line going due west that goes to the San Marcos Water Treatment Plant. And then we have a line down to the southwest that goes to the other customers of Canyon Regional Water Authority. So that's Crystal Clear Special Utility District and Green Valley Special Utility District. So it's a vast infrastructure network of about $400 million in capital investment to get this put in place to make this water available. It's something that we got our funding for this phase from the Water Development Board in 2017, and much of the infrastructure is in place. We're still finalizing some of it, although the pipeline that is going north up to Kyle is currently under construction. So it's a lot of effort still ongoing with this. One thing I wanted to highlight, I mentioned earlier that the potentially contentious, difficult relationship with the local river authority, the Guadalupe Blanco River Authority. Well, things change. Sometimes doors reopen. And we ended up entering into a partnership with them in 2018 where they bring us raw water, we treat it and transmit it through our transmission system for them to sell to their customers, which include Lockhart, New Braunfels, and Goforth Special Utility District. Once they got contracted with those customers, you looked at it on the map, it overlaid almost exactly with where we are already planning our infrastructure to go. And due to a change in leadership at the River Authority, the relationships have thawed quite a bit. And so we were able to enter into these discussions and enter into a partnership that made sense for both of us. In Alliance customers' case, we saved over $30 million in capital costs by partnering with them. It's much cheaper to build a little bit larger pipeline than it is to build a whole nother pipeline. And so we're able to share those costs, both sides, both us and GBRA, with our customers. We also have some additional operational savings, right? Only having to operate one set of lines, one treatment plant versus combined, we would have had two separate treatment plants and two separate sets of pipelines. That reduces the environmental impact as we go through these areas. Again, we're not having to get easements in two different areas. Our easements are collined and all there together. And it expands the regional nature of the project. So I had a former lobbyist for us who doesn't do any work for us anymore, hasn't for a while, that used to say, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. I think that's a pretty good mantra to keep up in the water business because you just never know how things are going to turn and when it might make sense to try and work together on something else. Got a few pictures here of some of the construction. The two on the right are just kind of standard pipeline installations. The one on the left is some hand tunneling that a contractor did under SH 130 in the Lockhart area. So that's about an 800-foot tunnel or so where literally day and night people are crawling in there and hand mining that and getting that out. So we had all sorts of different tunneling techniques used, from high-tech horizontal directional drilling, micro-tunneling. We had all different types of options, but sometimes it still comes back to just manpower getting in the tunnel and making that work. On the bottom left is one of our well sites, just to show you generally what that kind of infrastructure looks like. In the upper right, we have elevated tanks on a couple of legs of our system that provide us some additional redundancy for water supply, as well as some pressure maintenance if we lose power for a period of time. And then finally, our water treatment plant. So this is a grassroots plant that we built in the area. I'm happy to report that as of August 1st, we've started delivering water out of this plant to some of our customers. And so it's been about just over a 20-year journey. We really started this effort in 2003 when our community started first talking together until water was delivered. Part of that was by design. Our customers didn't all need the water 5-10 years ago, and so we wanted to wait until that demand was there, for that way the people that are here now could pay for more of it rather than the people that were here 20 years ago. But it still takes a long time to plan and put together a new water supply project. So I'd say be mindful of that as you look forward into the future. And then the last slide I've got here is just some lessons learned that I thought might be helpful as I thought about where I think your group is and things you might want to keep focused on. First of all, it's easy to get distracted from what your goal is. Your goal is still to get new water supplies to the community. You may have any number of different water purveyors that come to you and say they've got the solution, and that may ultimately be the right solution for you. But I would encourage you to still continue on your original path and just don't let those discussions, items derail you from the path that you choose. It's fine to look at those in parallel, but don't stop all conversations until you vet through whether the option that's coming to you will work or not, because you will get bombarded with those through time. Demand projections change. As best as we can to look at what the crystal ball is going to be, what we think that future water demand is going to be, they change. It's important to monitor those and update them frequently, because that is a key aspect to where the water needs to go, how much of it needs to go where, so keep that in mind. Rural areas in particular, this is my own history, is that they really have a challenge planning for what the full future looks like. They know they're going to grow, but there tends to be a mindset of, boy, it's hard to imagine what the next 30 to 50 years is really going to bring. So I'm just going to focus on what I need 15 to 20 years. But when you're trying to size infrastructure and really look at the long haul, you need to be more mindful of the really big picture. And so the more support that can be provided to make sure that everybody's looking at the long-term big picture, I think the better off you are. Projects and plans of other groups change frequently and may impact us. I mentioned Austin and San Antonio. You know, we continue to try and monitor a little bit what they are thinking and what they're doing, because again, their long-term plans, they are still much larger entities than us. That can have significant impacts on what our future may mean and where we may need to go. And then the overall key is delivered water cost. Successful projects must ultimately be affordable to water users. Those are the people at the end of the day that are paying for all the effort, is the ratepayers that get their monthly bills. And so at the end of the day, we've got to develop or phase or do some way to make these water supplies affordable for those end users. So I finished a little early.